we do a lot for them. We want to set it up. We want to make sure it's done right for them. So a lot of the parents really wanted us to take care of it and have the perfect filter. But then a lot of the parents wanted to handle it on their own. So it's kind of balancing what the parents really want or really need. A lot of the parents, they don't even necessarily understand what they want blocked. They might want downloads blocked, but we have to explain why you can't block downloads, how it's not a thing. We also want it to be a learning experience. So if a student comes to me and has some site that's blocked, I've told them, and nobody's taken me up on the offer, if you write me a one-page paper on why you need this site unblocked, I'll gladly do it. Let them kind of teach them, but I haven't.
So I'm also at a private school, and the private school community is quite different from the public school community. We also tend to do quite a bit of hand-holding with our student body and our parent body and our constituencies. We also sometimes have to explain to them that just because we're giving your child technology doesn't mean that you can abdicate your responsibilities as a parent. We're giving you the technology to take home. We would encourage you to let your child use the technology at home, but ultimately you are still the parent in your house. And for that reason, and this is a little different from these three, for that reason we have never implemented an off-site web filter at MKA. Our students take their laptops home and they are not web filtered when they're not on our campus, which then leads to all kinds of other issues. Parents saying, well, what if I want a web filter? Who's going to implement that? And we say, well, not us, because this is your house, and you're responsible for doing this web filter at your house. We can offer you a recommendation, but we can't support you. We can't come to your house and set that up for you, which is quite different from a lot of public schools where it's a requirement to have a web filter while that laptop or iPad is on campus and also while they're at home.
Yeah, so I mean, your school culture and the community around is definitely going to dictate what kind of direction you take. I mean, we've also had the same Wi-Fi discussion. In fact, this year we've had a parent visiting our tech director probably about once a month, bringing in new articles, trying to convince us to get rid of Wi-Fi, and we've had to just politely say that's not going to happen. I once met a parent as well who was absolutely against the idea of filtering at all. He wanted the filter to be completely open and stuff. I think he might have lived in Berkeley at one point. I don't. He was a weird gentleman. I had to explain to him our sort of legal requirements around that and stuff like that. He just wasn't getting it. So the culture that you have around is definitely going to have a big impact on which direction you go, how you block, how you handle things that shouldn't be blocked, and how much interaction you have with your actual parents.
So K-12 public school, our solicitor directed that we need to filter both on and off-site, and there was really no more discussion about it. So we've been doing it now for almost 10 years. We've learned a lot along the way, but in more recent years, we've definitely had fewer complaints, and we just attribute that to kids just having unfiltered internet via their phone. So if something isn't working on the web filter on their laptop, they probably are just pulling out their phone and getting what they need that way.
We have a question via Google. Let's see. This will work. Let's push it back. Yeah. Hey, that's pretty cool. So this is to do remote web filtering. So this is actually kind of some of the stuff that we'll be touching into. For us, we do all of our web filtering cloud-based, and
So the thing about a remote web filtering on any devices, there's literally only two different ways you're going to do it. You're either going to do it via a proxy on the device, which will be a universal proxy, or you're going to do it via some sort of special software application, depending on the device, which actually ultimately ends up being a proxy, just a proxy built into an application. There's really no other, I guess there is a third way, because you could theoretically filter locally, but our experience with that is that was not very good at all. And it also means you can't trace the traffic. So I guess the direct answer would be, you could do VPN too, but that would be terrible. So proxy is your best bet for off-site filtering. That was our conclusion. Did you guys come up with
similarly, we pretty much proxy or bust.
There we go. All right. Oh, what's going on? Hold on, sorry. There we go.
So filters, as you know, primarily are for blocking sexually explicit content. And
Oh.
25 U.S. states have laws that explicitly
Skip the slide.
require you to have a filter in order to get your public funding.
Actually, hold on, let's skip one slide. Oh, no, that's it. Yep, all right, sorry. Yeah.
So now you.
All right. So one of the laws that was in place was Coppa with one P, because it obviously is confusing at times. But Coppa with one P was passed in '98, but never really took effect. It, in fact, immediately was pretty much taken into the courts. And it was set to restrict access by minors to any material defined as harmful by community standards on the internet. So a very broad thing that could cover too much stuff, really. And like I said, it never really took effect, got struck down, got brought up a whole bunch of times. The Supreme Court fully killed the law in 2009, citing that harmful and community standards were too broad of terms and violated the First Amendment rights. The whole thing was pretty much mainly aimed at pornography, and it stemmed from the Communications Decency Act, which was also struck down by the courts over and over again, which targeted censoring pornography and stuff like that.
Okay, and then the other law that you're going to hear from time to time is the Coppa or Coppa law with two Ps. That actually doesn't have much to do with web filtering, but it does tend to be thrown in the mix whenever you're discussing it. That law specifically deals with the collection of data on students or kids under the age of 13. What that basically law stipulates is what you can and cannot collect. It also stipulates that in order for a student to be able to use an online service such as Google or whatnot, there needs to be written parental consent that is verifiable. So as a school district, you should be collecting, if you're a G Suite district, for instance, you should be collecting a written consent from every parent before you set up an account for the children in your district. And it pretty much centers around that. The gotcha with that I would just say in general is whatever online service you want to use, you should double check to see if they are compliant with Coppa. Google being an interesting example, they do not claim to be Coppa compliant. They do, however, say that they follow the guideline, but they put the verifiable consent back onto you. So that's one example. Other websites will say they're completely Coppa compliant and they'll require the parents to be involved with the process of setting it up. If anybody in here has ever had to do the Apple ID setup like they did before, not like they do now, not the institutional ones, where you had to actually get the parent to finish the setup process, they were doing that specifically because of Coppa.
In 2000 also, the CIPA law was assigned. That is the Children's Internet Protection Act of 2000. And what you need to know about this one mostly is that K-12 schools and libraries must have a filter. It's a condition for federal funding. So if you're a public school, you need to make sure that you're compliant with CIPA.
And this is the reason why we're here, is because of the CIPA law.
And some private schools have to follow that if you get E-rate funding as well.
That's correct. So quite simply, managing parent expectations could be the hardest and most frustrating part of your job, and there's just no other way around this. Actually implementing a filter, not that hard. Dealing with the ramifications then of the parents not understanding what the filter is or how it works, or meeting their expectations because either their expectations are too low or they're too high, or they just don't have any understanding of how it works. This is often really difficult.
Yeah, we found communications absolutely key, and a formal written procedure should be shared with the parents from the beginning. There would be edge cases that you need to work through with parents and parents and students if they have individual circumstances that don't translate to your whole body, but providing as equitable experience as possible for students just makes it more streamlined and makes it easier for you to manage.
So coming from Menlo Park, which is a hop, skip, and a jump from Silicon Valley, our parents are particularly tech savvy. The problem is a lot of them know enough to be dangerous, but don't necessarily know all the nitty-gritty. So we've had to, once again, communicate thoroughly with the parents, especially with the edge cases, to let them know, look, the filtering that we have in place is here to protect your child, but it is not perfect by a long shot. Yes, your fourth grader is going to, at some point, if he really wants to, bring up some pictures of boobs. It's going to happen. So we have to set that kind of expectation. We do the best that we can in the situation, but yeah, we do the best that we can, and we have to work with the parents to be able to make the solution pretty good. Another example of things that you absolutely cannot block while we're on that subject is our kids discovered that you can run native Java code directly from the Omnibox in Chrome. So the kids were copying and pasting JavaScript into the Chrome box, and they were running a Java version of Flappy Birds. It was a major problem. And that was another thing. That was another, once again, that goes back to setting the expectations by telling the parents, those are the things that we simply cannot block. There's no technological way of doing it.
And like I said earlier, some parents, I might pick up the phone in the morning and talk to a parent, and this parent wants it set a lot stronger. And then I might hang up and have to talk to another parent, and that parent wants it set a lot weaker. Some want us having like strict filters at home, and some want no filters at home, and some want just games blocked and whatever. Like, it's so all over the place of managing. So it's really hard to find that perfect even ground on what to do and how to.
And you have to remind parents gently as well that while they're concerned with the well-being of their child, which is great, you have to remind them, like in our situation, there's 3,000 other kids that we've got to be concerned with as well. So we have to find something that works for the majority and definitely not the minority, and certainly not the one.
And it definitely comes down to, like, a lot of the time it's parenting. They might want like YouTube blocked or something like that. We can't do that because how much good educational stuff is there. But their kid might be watching a video of whatever newest game being played and switching between that and homework, and it's taking them 6 hours to do their math homework on their computer. The parent blames us in the filtering because they're not able to work with their student or get around it because the student is better at technology.
We started this discussion by saying that you need to match your solution and your solution you put in place needs to match to your environment. And that's still true. Every one of you has a different environment in here. Not one of us is the same. I've heard stories about boarding schools that turn off the Wi-Fi at 10 p.m. That's a type of filter, and it works really well for that particular environment. Wouldn't work in my environment, but in a boarding school, it works really well.
So make sure your teachers, faculty, and staff test what they're doing, and even apps on student devices, because there's been so many times when I've had a teacher be like surprised when something's blocked.
Or not blocked.
Show of hands, who's received the emails at 7 p.m. or 9 p.m. saying, hey, can you unblock a site?
Yeah.
Or you get the help desk ticket at 1 a.m. and then a phone call at 2 a.m. because it's not solved yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so we had a problem at one of our elementary schools where the kids were fifth graders, 2 or 3 of them, were basically Googling fifth grade level inappropriate stuff. You know, stuff that as an adult is like, okay, why would you do that? But really relatively innocent but yet inappropriate stuff. And of course the administration of that school is coming to me and saying, we need to block this, we need to stop this, and I had to just explain to them that I'm sorry, that's not a technological fix, that's a discipline fix. There's not too much we can do as far as blocking searches go.
And even, a lot of the time I've had a faculty member maybe use a student device, maybe it's over the summer, and they're using like our lower school iPad, which just we have the built-in Apple filter, and that has so little customization to it, and it's blocking some math site for whatever reason. There's not really a way that I can get that unblocked. So working with the teachers and managing the staff expectations and what they're doing is really it's a little easier than the parents, but still a tough thing to balance out.
Yeah, I would say I've spent, I don't know, 50% of the time working on the content filtering and the other 50% of the time setting the expectations between the parents and the staff.
And sometimes it's just helping them, educating the end user about what's going on. I had a ticket just this week from a student who's doing her summer work on WebAssign, which is a popular textbook website for math and chemistry and biology. And WebAssign has an unfortunate habit of running a Flash version detection script. So if you're not running the most recent version of Flash, it doesn't load. And then we also have browsers that are blocking Flash from loading. But this user was convinced that it was the web filter getting in the way. Well, number one, we don't have a web filter while you're at home in the summertime, so it's impossible for that to be true. And number two, then we had to solve the problem by explaining to her that this is not a WebAssign problem necessarily, or even a browser problem, or that this is a web browser problem, not a WebAssign problem. So, education, not the filter.
All right, so this one I'll start. So yeah, perfect filtering. As you can see, fairy tale. Not going to happen. You will not be able to have the perfect filter. There will always be false positives and false negatives. So you need to have a plan in place to deal with that. We use smooth wall at our location, and what's nice about that, on the block page, I can actually put a link that students can click on, and parents and teachers, to request the site to be unblocked. So whenever they come across a site that's unblocked, or a site that's blocked, they can click on this link, type in a reason why they want to block, and that gets delivered to my inbox. I can then take a look at it and use our internal metrics as to what determines whether it should be unblocked or not. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes I have to forward a link to the administrator of the site so they can make the determination if it's in one of those gray areas. And then I respond to the student in kind from there. We also have an AUP at our middle school that's really great to be able to refer to that as to why we can't unblock it. I can just say it doesn't work with our AUP.
So, you know, false positives and all that is a big thing, or yeah. We had a student in our intermediate school, and our intermediate school, they want a very controlled filtering situation, very, very heavy-handed content filter. So the head of the intermediate school called me into her office, and she was wanted me to check all of the machines to make sure the filtering is working, you know, get logs, all this type of information, because they were doing research on, I don't know what it was exactly, but they pulled up like Google Maps and were looking at the review of a mall, and there was a picture of a girl that had flashed a camera, right? There's no way a filter's catching that. So that, like, but that's the type of thing and expectations you kind of have to balance out and point out that there's no perfect solution. You know, other things in the other way, a student was doing research on some sort of project on dogs or whatever, and searched wiener dogs. The kid had no idea why that was blocked. The teacher is like, no, I don't know why it's blocked, and holding in their laughter on that. You know, and then even the other way, in our first year, we use OpenDNS for just DNS-based filtering on our upper school kids, and we learned quickly that, like, now we block all of Tumblr.com, but we learned that, like, it wouldn't block boobs.tumblr.com or something like that. It only blocked like that one level of domain that it clicked on that triggered it. So then we had to block all of Tumblr, for example. So there is no perfect solution. Students are always going to find something that the manufacturers maybe never intended.
Yeah, so an example of an imperfect filter that we ran into was a couple years ago. Unbeknownst to us, iBoss recategorized Reddit and removed the adult tag. So all of us students were getting to it for a couple days or maybe a little longer, and we didn't even know it. So it's important as an administrator, you're checking your logs and kind of seeing like what's bubbling to the top, where are students actually going to see if stuff like that's happening, because sometimes they change things on their end, and we've had conversations that, hey, we'd like to know if you guys change a top website like that, and it's kind of important for SIPA compliance. So
work with your web filter, but also keep an eye on your logs and see what students are actually doing.
I've also found that sometimes you learn which students will tell you the truth and which students will tell you what's going on. And so I don't want to encourage you to find moles, but they're there, and you learn which students are going to come to you and tell you, hey, so-and-so is doing this, and it's inappropriate. So,
Yeah, we also learned that it is vital to have the culture, I guess you could say, in place that allows students that stumble across things that should be blocked that aren't, to be able to report them without feeling like they're going to get
Right.
into trouble.
correct.
We had one, I want to say 3rd or 4th grader that was doing a project, and she was Googling pictures of the number 1 because she wanted a nice picture to put into her thing. And she's going through the image search results, and all of them are what you would expect, except 2.5 pages down, there's a wonderful picture of a penis. Like, randomly, and this poor kid panicked because she thought she was in so much trouble. So the teacher had to calm her down, and you're not in trouble, thank you for reporting it, kind of thing. So that's another thing you definitely want to emphasize with your staff, that students should have that ability to report those kinds of things without feeling like they're going to end up in trouble. And then like this slide says, I want to point out, no filter is perfect. You will need secondary and tertiary methods in place. That is to say, if you think you're going to go out and you're going to buy a single product that's going to be a turnkey, that's going to do everything for you, that's just not going to happen.
So we have a couple of questions that came in. Let's pull up this one, first one. So what type of reporting monitoring have you done? System filing. So we actually haven't had that problem really at St. Andrews. To be perfectly honest, also the administration, I don't want to say it in the microphone, lax on that type of stuff. But so the couple of times that we've found it, it's basically through some sort of way to circumvent the filter, and the kid will play dumb. And I'll just add some sort of block to block a VPN extension or some sort of proxy blocking thing.
We found that if you have a well-written and well-enforced acceptable use policy, then this isn't a technical problem, this becomes a disciplinary problem. And then it's out of your hands, it goes to the administration.
So what's worked really well for us when we've had this kind of thing, we can do some reporting and monitoring, but it's not perfect for a variety of reasons. A lot of times when this comes to light, it's usually a teacher has noticed them doing it, or other kids have noticed and reported it. And like Bob said, it generally ends up being a discipline issue. So generally what happens is I'll end up sitting at the table with the administrator and the kid in question, and we'll just put the scare of God in them. Don't do this, we monitor everything, that kind of thing.
I think you'll also find that most of your students believe that you're monitoring everything.
Yeah.
So a lot of them are steering clear of it anyway.
Helps if they're younger too.
Let me move on to the next one. Do any of you use? Yes, I do. We'll get into that a little bit in a couple of slides also. Allow list versus deny.
If you're going to block everything and whitelist stuff, be prepared for probably Excel hell.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to keep some pretty big lists. I personally would say that that's not the way to go unless you like doing a hell of a lot of work. Generally speaking, a lot of the content filters will have category listings that they maintain, and we will generally block by category, and then we'll add the specific blocked sites in as we go.
All right, we're going to pop back to the slides here. Let me see if I can get it to do it nicely. Hey, look at that. It did work. All right.
So some of the flavors of filters, cloud, we've talked about this briefly already, cloud versus on-site. You use a cloud filter.
Yep.
Right? We happen to have ours on site because, again, MKA is not doing any off-site filtering, so we can keep everything contained within our LAN.
Yeah, so every platform that you go out there is going to have different issues. When we did our original look, we compared several, and we picked the one that we felt had the least number of issues for our environment. It's going to vary depending on the solution.
So on-site, our IBOS acts as a transparent inline filter, and it's kind of just a bump in the line, grabs everything. Offside, we're using a proxy auto config file, pack file, that forces students back through the iBoss, which is actually, we have a third box in the cloud. So students that are at home are getting filtered in the iBoss cloud. They don't actually come back to our ISP. iBoss filtering works for Windows, macOS, iOS, Chromebooks, but right now, we filter all of those on-site, but off-site, we're only doing the macOS student high school devices.
And like it's been said over and over, it can work in all sorts of different ways and at different levels, on-site, off-site, off-site. Is it a cloud-based thing? Is it proxied to them and comes back and bounces all around the world 3 times? VPN back on-site to you, stuff like that. If it's on-site, is it in line with your firewall? Is that going to cause issues? Because maybe you only want your students filtered. So now either somehow you have to build a network where the students all go this way and the faculty staff go that way, or is it going to slow down faculty staff as well? As much as the companies claim that it will pass through perfectly, is it really going to? Because that could really be a bottleneck depending on how fat your pipes out to the world are. And now you have all of your traffic going through this box before it goes out through the router. And iOS even seems to change it a little bit as it's gone along. Used to all be about the pack files, and now it seems that Apple wants people to leverage their iOS content filter API and securely does that, and a couple others. They have an app that installs, and that seems to configure things that for the filtering.
Next slide.
All right, so what do we all use?
So I use iBoss, as I've said a couple times now. We've always filtered on-site since I've been at Lower Merion, but we've only been doing macOS off-site filtering for 10 years now. And maybe as you can imagine, 10 years ago, there weren't many customers filtering Macs off-site in the scale of 2,500 devices. So starting 10 years ago, it was kind of a painful couple years for us to find a solution that would work for us. We started with WebSense. We tried Lightspeed for a year. We tried Edgewave for a year. And then we settled on iBoss, and we've been with them for over 5 years now. So we had a whole list of requirements, an Excel spreadsheet set up. Some of our requirements were, like I said, we needed off-site filtering hosted in the cloud. So if our district ISP goes down or we have to do maintenance, students at home can still do their homework. They don't have bricks because we fail closed. If a filter goes down for some reason, the kids can't get anywhere. We also wanted ability to do timed allows. For example, we allow Netflix, but only after 3 p.m., so it doesn't affect our bandwidth. However, students at home can stream Netflix all day long if they want. We want reporting kept for 90 days. That's kind of an important one for us. And while students are internal, we want to filter on all ports, not just 80.443. We wanted to easily pull reports. Kind of surprising, but some of the other filters that we had been with in the past, like pulling reports or making a simple change, it wasn't real time and it was slow and painful. So to just be able to easily do a couple clicks to do reports or make a filtering change was really important to us. And probably the biggest thing for us was finding the support helpful and available 24/7. We had a really bad experience with Edgewave support, so iBoss really worked with us to get the product working, and we still have a really good relationship with their support team. iBoss is a layer 7 application aware product and has options for blocking evasive protocols like UltraServe SSH. They do social media controls for Snapchat, Spotify, YouTube. They do malware detection, which we use a lot. We have a lot of blocks for malware. They do HTTPS decryption. They'll sandbox internet downloads, so if a staff or student member downloads a file, they'll actually scan it on the box before it hits the client device. And they can also do data loss prevention.
We've been using Untangle for about 10 years, and there's a lot of the reasons why we haven't moved away from Untangle. Our Untangles are not only our web filters, but they're also our firewall, our load balancer and aggregator between our 2 WAN connections. And they also do some DNS mapping for us so that we have a DHCP statically assigned IP number to every device. And then our network manager has gone in and assigned a DNS name to every single IP number. And so every device shows up in the logs with a real name, a human readable name. So when it's time to come to pull a log, I'm not having to match up DHCP logs with firewall logs. It's all right there in the log with the name, human readable names. So because this box serves so many functions, we've stayed with it all these years, and we've been pretty happy with it. If at some point we ever decide to do offsite filtering, we may have to look at a different solution.
Yeah, I would also mention with Untangle, because we came from Untangle as well. We were using OpenDNS before I was working there, then we switched to Untangle right about the time I started. We used it for a year or two, and then we moved on to Smoothwall. Untangle is also free, or they have a free level that does basic whitelist, blacklist filtering, which works reasonably well. But we ultimately switched over to Smoothwall because we needed the offsite filtering for our one-to-one iPad programs. And once again, Untangle didn't really have any options for that, even with the paid level. So ultimately, what happened was we built out our own server on site. It's a HP Gen 7 or 8 server. It's got 16 cores and about 40 gigs of RAM to cover our close to 3,500 devices or so. It does some pretty good logging. But what we really liked about it was the offsite filtering via the proxy with the pack file, but was our main goal. And then the other stuff that we liked about it, which we have started using, is the ability to do heuristic filtering. So we're able to filter by keywords as well as specific sites. A good example of that would be something like Wikipedia. You know, the article on, you know, cars is unblocked and able to get to, but some of the more the articles on like sex, for instance, would be blocked. As a matter of fact, we've had to unblock the entire .gov top-level domain because of that. It kept blocking weird, random FDA websites. It also allowed us to do different levels of filtering for different networks and people with Active Directory integration. So now my teachers can actually use their credentials to get a much freer level of being blocked. So they can get to a lot more things than the students can. As an example, they can get to Facebook, but the students cannot. It has a pretty good reporting engine in it. We do keep 3 or 6 months worth of logs in it, which are pretty decent. Those have come in handy to search for devices, and if the students are logged in, the student names and stuff like that. We have the real-time reports as well, so I can actually bring up a real-time blocking report on a specific client, and I can see what's being blocked and what's not being blocked at any given time. That's helpful for some discipline issues, but mostly that's helpful for troubleshooting. If a website in particular doesn't work, it helps me work out what aspects of the site may be causing that problem. It's also a layer 7 aware solution, so I can block specific applications. And it has, and like yours, we use it as our firewall. So it's our gateway to the internet as well. And we're able to map public IPs to, we have about, more than 255 public IPs. So I'm able to map specific subnets to specific public IPs. So from a reporting aspect, if anybody on the internet says, hey, I'm being attacked by you at this IP, helps me trace down where that traffic's coming from. It also offers decrypt and inspect options, so we can also look into HTTPS traffic if we want to. We don't, for a variety of reasons, but we could if we wanted to. And then as a general setup, it's, like I said, it's on site, runs throughout internet. We use a pack file hosted on there, so the kids at home go through there. If our internet goes down, the kids would not be able to get to most of the internet from home. That thankfully has not been a major issue. I think we've been down once in the last 2 or 3 years, so we have a pretty reliable setup. We push out those proxy settings via Jamf to our mobile devices. If we were ever to send MacBooks home, we could do the same thing via Monkey. What's nice about the proxy setup is almost every single device out there will support some sort of universal proxy settings. It's a technology that's about as old as the internet. Apple does some weird things with it from time to time, but for the most part, they support it.
So I wanted to talk about, this is a mess that we have at St. Andrews and why we've had a mess of different things. And I even see people like grimacing and looking awkwardly at the screen. So our one-to-one started in 2012, and the administration promised that we would have filtering on all the machines, as well as the first thing that we heard from the loudest parents was that they wanted the machines to be filtered when they went home. So now we had to figure out a filter that would work off-site. And we never wanted to be in that situation where we kind of are now an ISP. So all of our solutions that we found had to become cloud-based. And at that time, we were only on the one-to-one program for 3 grades. And so we used Barracuda Networks. They're like web security agent. I forget. I don't even think they have the product anymore. It was a thing that ran on the machine itself. And it sent all traffic off to Barracuda's servers, who then sent it off to like Google or whoever. It would come back to the Barracuda server and back to the client. And that's all right when it works. It also integrated great with our Active Directory, so we could say this grade gets different than this and so forth. So it had great features, locked people to safe search, that type of things as well. We went to the full school for one-to-one the following year. And Barracuda Networks made a change around September, which, as you can imagine, is a bad time for education, for them to make a major change.
They're just following Apple.
Yeah, that's true. And Google was coming up with an error saying there was too many IPs requesting or whatever, because everybody who used that product goes through their cloud and hits Google and then whatever. And so they were having massive problems now. It got kind of solved, but the CEO or president or whoever sent out a massive email to all customers of that product apologizing and really, trying to win us back. But they had already kind of lost us at that point, because they made, they have a thing that we really depended on, and now the whole school was basically down because this thing wasn't working. So that's when we quickly shifted off to OpenDNS for our middle and upper school grades. However, because we have different divisions with different needs, we needed something stronger than OpenDNS, just DNS filtering, and that's where Nanny came in with our intermediate school. Unfortunately, luckily, it's maybe 50-ish, 60 machines, but it's not manageable by a management console. It's by hand. So I had to touch 50, 60 machines every year for a few years, because the head of the intermediate school would not allow something weaker than basically that very strong, heavy-handed filtering. And Nanny did some good stuff too, like if they went to like a Wikipedia page that had a bad word on it, it actually blurred out the word, which is kind of like ridiculous, but kind of a neat feature too at the same time. It didn't just block that page, it just realized like that one thing was bad on it. But it also was too heavy-handed and would block a lot of things that kids needed. So that's where those two things came in. Then we have the parents who are like, your filtering isn't strong enough, I need more control, I want to be the one who controls the filter. And we found that by accident, K9 filtering works installed on our Macs and doesn't fight with OpenDNS. So some machines might even have 2 filtering solutions on it. And so we came up with the solution to ease the fears of these few parents, and it's very few. It would be like 1 or 2 a year, if that even, where we'd install it. They'd give us a password that they wanted for it, and so then we'd get it installed, set up with this password, and they're the ones who manage it. A lot of the time, it would last about a week, and then the parent would remove it because they realized, like, this is a pain in the butt to try to manage and figure out what I can allow and not allow. And a lot of the students would be blocked in school, and I'd put my hands up and say, your parents are the ones managing this. Like, I'm sorry, there's really nothing I can do. It's their password. Quickly comes off, and the parent quickly decides they understand that filtering is a problem. So then we've changed the program a little bit. Our intermediate school went iPads a year ago. And so in our intermediate school, we now needed a new filter because Nanny doesn't exist. Well, it's a browser on iOS, but I wasn't about to do that. I don't hate myself that much, and I don't hate the students that much. So we didn't deploy the NetNanny special safe browser, which I'm sure would be terrible. So my boss, I've struggled to find a solution. My boss just did a quick search in the App Store, found MobaSip, which that was literally how we found it. And they were a cloud-based thing that did filtering great on iOS 10. As soon as iOS 11 came out, as you know, until recently, Apple didn't allow you to really easily block updating. So it pops up saying, hey, this is available. Students are just like, I tap things. And so they're updating their iPads. Or the parent is like, yes, I'm going to update your iPad for you because I'm tech savvy enough to push buttons. And so that would make the internet not work because MobaSip claimed it was some problem with Apple, which I know was nonsense because everybody else worked fine. And you'd have to do like a reset network settings on the iPad, which loses the name, and now you have to reconnect it to the internet. And that wasn't just for iOS 11. That was every time there was an update for iOS 11. So I was not willing to support that ever again. It turned out also it was 3 developers in India, and it would take sometimes up to a week to get a response with any sort of support. So for the support reasons alone, I was done with them. And so then we decided that we wanted securely. Kept my eye on them because they're a filtering company that aims for schools and Google Apps schools. And I thought, hey, we're a school and we're Google Apps and we're iOS and everything's great about that. So cool. So that's what they're going to be using on our iPads this upcoming year. And if it goes well, it may get expanded in the next year or so to all of the Macs as well.
So what you're seeing is that over 6 years, 7 years,
6
you've
years,
gone
yeah.
through 6 solutions.
Yeah. So basically every year I was investigating, spending about a month or two to figure out what's the newest, best thing out there. So always keep looking for that better solution unless you're absolutely strangely happy with your filtering as being the best thing ever.
Or have a multi-year contract.
Yeah, that was something else. We realized we were not going to sign a multi-year contract the first year with filtering after Barracuda burned us.
Yeah, and I would want to also mention as well, remind everyone, if you're going to go with a cloud-based filtering and reporting, try not to forget our friend Coppa with the 2 Ps because that dictates what you can and cannot collect data-wise. All right. Preventing circumnavigation of our filtering systems.
You guys recognize your students up there?
Yeah. It happens. We have, as an example, we have we had a middle school student that his science fair project was building his own AI. That should give you a sense of how some of our upper end students are when it comes to technology. So yeah, like it says there, never underestimate the ability of a bored school kid who's motivated to defeat your filters. Bottom line is they have more time to poke at the holes than you ever will. And that definitely leads into discipline versus text fixes. Like I said, with the JavaScript in the Chrome Omnibox, we can't defeat that from a technological standpoint, and I had to push that back to the school site as a discipline issue. When kids find the holes, you just have to work to patch them as best you can.
As you can imagine, it can be tough. You don't know what you don't know, and kids that aren't going to tell you when they found some way to bypass the filter. So you can keep an ear out with the friendly kids maybe, but sometimes you just, you don't know what you don't know, and then you realize the kids have been doing it. And then this year, an example of that is we learned Google Translate can be used as a proxy, because it's forced HTTPS, and the other site's traffic is hidden from the filter behind Google's HTTPS traffic. And I have a little example video if you aren't aware of this already.
Make sure your students don't see this.
I think they all know by now. But
And if one kid knows about it, 50 will know in about a week or a
Yeah.
week and a half.
Yeah, so on the left, you'll see I already kind of selected Spanish, and then I'm going to enter poker.com, and you'll see it presents a clickable URL on the right, and it all opens within this Google Translate URL. So the filter's only seeing that the kid went to translate.google.com. They never see that the student went to poker.com.
Ta-da!
Yeah.
Built-in proxy with Google.
And I didn't really show you there, but the kid can also, once they bring up poker.com or playboy.com or anything, they can browse in the website. It's not just you have to enter the URL every time. It's actually browsable and clickable. So we'll have more on this later, but consider restricting or decrypting Google Translate traffic.
Uh-oh. Oh, yeah. Hover up to the top.
Yeah. thank you.
Perfect.
So the truth at my school is that we realized when we built our one-to-one program 10 years ago, we did not want an arms race. We were very, very clear that we did not want to spend all of our time butting heads and being in this arms war with our students. And so we've always, at my school, because our culture allows it, we've always had a little bit of a laissez-faire, kind of a hands-off approach. We still have filters. We still have an AUP that's quite enforceable. And we still have disciplinary issues. But most of the web filtering isn't an issue. In fact, the only issues we really have are like false positives, when we have to unblock WebMD because it's a legitimate site, but it's been blocked by the filter for some reason.
Yeah, and since we don't have high school kids, I think it would be different in high school. We go up to 8th grade. Generally speaking, when little Johnny works out how to get around the filter, he's so proud of himself that he starts sharing it with his friends.
Right.
And once again, that viral thing means that by the time 15 kids know, one of the staff is going to find out. Then you trace it back to the original kid, you bring him into the interrogation room, you sit him down, you go on about the logs, and you deal with the discipline at that point, depending on what level they went to. If it's something like running a game in the browser, maybe a slap on the wrist. If it's like they've uncovered pornography and have been distributing it, maybe it's a bit more than that. You involve parents. If it's a legal issue, then a policeman is in the interrogation room. So you need to have those plans in place for what happens when inevitably they find that little hole that you missed.
Yeah, and they're kind of like, it reminds me of from the first Jurassic Park when like the Velociraptor is just continuing to test the fence, right? That's what your students are doing. They're finding their ways, you know, with our students, and there's no way that I could prevent this. They learn that if they turn the Wi-Fi off and back on, OpenDNS doesn't kick in for like, I don't know, 5-10 seconds or something, and so they have 5-10 seconds to get to Facebook. If they leave it up, then it's cool. It's in there. So they'll load up Facebook and don't hit refresh, and now they can chat with their friends or do whatever they need. There are certain things you can't prevent. That I don't think is a preventable thing really, because it's just this agent that doesn't launch fast enough.
We blocked Netflix at school solely for bandwidth reasons. And it was a big, big, big deal when Netflix started allowing caching, because students discovered they could cache videos on their laptop at home, bring it to school, and still watch them. It was like a monumental shift, like the world opened, like the ground opened up in front of them. Like, so.
Yeah, we block Facebook on campus, but when they go home, they have access. So if, once again, they don't refresh it, they leave it, they're probably pretty good through the day for it to be open. They just can't scroll through things.
Right.
Yeah, and be prepared for those moments of, holy hell, that is brilliant.
Yeah.
Don't do that, but my God, you're going places somewhere.
Yeah.
Do you want a job?
Yeah. If you become these trouble students' best friends, more than likely, they're going to be kind of working with you than against you.
Yeah, so we definitely have had 1 or 2 students that have done this, and it turned out that they were just more or less bored. So working, disciplining them for their infraction, but then like working with the administration to kind of like give them a job in that general field is pretty good. We had one kid that was very good at finding holes, so we said, hey, here's another iPad, find whatever holes you can, keep it within the AUP, and you let us know what holes you find. And that worked for the last part of his 8th grade there, and he was no longer getting in trouble every other week for a technology infraction.
So some of the other ways that we filter,
Shoot.
I have a rather extensive list of blocked applications in my GSS. We block all P2P apps, and so this is an example of the Torch browser being blocked because it contains P2P inside of it. And so we just simply block the app from running. So that's not really a web filter, but it's a way we're filtering in the usage of the tools on our network and on our computers.
So we're pretty security focused, I think, for K-12. We restrict administrative access. None of our students or 18 teachers have administrative access. We do application blocking via config profiles, folder whitelisting, so they can only launch programs from folders that we whitelisted, and that's just folders that are not read-write. We also whitelist Chrome extensions for security and also student privacy reasons. And we do a DNS black hole to block search.yahoo.com because we couldn't enforce safe search over HTTPS. And we also DNS black hole Google Translate on and off site. And if you're looking into doing that as well, don't forget Google Translate also exists at other sites like translate.google.co.uk, and all of those different countries have their own domains. So it's not as easy as just doing one DNS entry. You're looking at a couple dozen.
At St. Andrews, none of the students are administrators, but they have the ability to download something like Steam. Steam doesn't require admin access. So we do application restrictions through Jamf, and I blacklist probably 600, 700, 800 Chrome extensions. I figured out a script to kind of like just go through every so often and export the Chrome ID or whatever you want to call it of VPN extensions from Chrome, and just add them to the configuration profile. So that's kind of like Damien was saying. These aren't specifically filtering, but it's other ways that you can filter. We had started looking into like host files as well, more to prevent like malware kind of things. In the classroom though, the teachers have we provide them with a tool called Dino, which kind of does Apple Classroom. So they have a little bit more control on what the students are doing in their classroom via, like, they can block them to specific websites or block every application or something like that. So the teachers even have a little bit more ways to filter.
Yeah, so our biggest things outside of web filtering were mostly to do with safe search and YouTube. YouTube's been a very big an issue. But essentially we block on our student devices with regards to Chrome. We do not allow any extensions to be installed. We blacklist everything with the exception of several whitelisted extensions, because sometimes the extensions can do weird proxy things that you may not pick up. We also force safe search for Bing and Google via our local DNS, which works really well, but the gotcha there is you make sure you block every single Google domain, every single Bing domain, .com, .co.uk, .co.cz, etc., etc. Google has a pretty good article on it. If you Google it, you'll find it, and it lists quite a few of their subdomains. So yeah, we don't block Yahoo, although we definitely should probably look into that because you cannot force safe search. And then we also we leverage the G Suite actually has a variety of tools built into it that actually help with YouTube and a couple of their other services. As an example, with YouTube, I'm able to block anything that is considered mature by the community. So my students cannot play it. Comes up and it says this is not valid for this domain. The flip side of that, I've been able to give my staff members the ability to add playable videos to that list. So any of my staff members can go to a particular video, and there's a nice blue button at the bottom of the video that they can click allow. Because that helps, because the YouTube stuff is nowhere, it is unbelievably non-perfect. I've seen them flag documentaries about the founding of the country as adult. And of course now I've got history teachers emailing me going, my kids can't play this video. So yeah, at the end of the day is you're going to have those secondary things in place.
This last bullet point, confiscate devices and go back to pen and paper. This sounds like a joke, but it's not. In our environment, in my culture that we built at our school, every teacher has ownership of their own classroom. That is 100% across the board. The technology department will never dictate how you use technology or how you choose not to use technology in your classroom at my school. And so we have some teachers who occasionally will say, laptops away, close them up. Phones aren't allowed in school necessarily. They're supposed to stay in lockers. And so you can build that kind of a culture at your school where web filtering isn't an issue because the devices may not even be used in that particular classroom.
Okay, so some filters allow you to decrypt traffic to more granularly filter HTTPS sites. You have to deploy a root CA from your content filter so that it kind of acts as a man in the middle. And on the fly, then it'll be able to mint trustable certificates for the site needing to be decrypted. And you should keep in mind there may be student staff privacy concerns with doing so because increased HTTPS traffic visibility. You'll see things like raw text of Google searches, and students are expecting that those are encrypted. So you should maybe check and make sure that's something you really want to do. I've also let you granularly decrypt, such as you can just decrypt Google Translate traffic. The only HTTPS traffic that would be decrypted would be Google Translate traffic. We're looking into doing that right now. We're kind of awaiting solicitor feedback to see if that's something we want to implement because we want to balance. Student privacy is important to us as well. So until we hear back from the solicitor, we are using a DNS black hole to block Google Translate, unfortunately. We've asked Google as well to try to give us a way to enforce like a safe Google Translate, kind of like they do for Safe Search.
So Smoothwall will also do DNI, decrypt and inspect. We looked at it and I ultimately decided not to do it because we don't want the visibility into encrypted sites that our staff and our students use. I mean, as a good example, if you use DNI and one of your staff members decides to do their banking on your own laptop and now you're decrypting their banking information and logging it into your system. And to us, that was a liability we weren't willing to take. Plus, the blocking is based on the URL. So you can still block HTTPS websites, you just can't see into them. So the heuristics don't apply at that point.
So cyberbullying protection, it kind of goes along with that, the decryption of HTTPS. You know, a lot of the filters now do cyberbullying, internet predators, threats of violence, suicidal searches, sexting, all that type of stuff. But where does that put you in the legal liabilities? You know, if a kid is searching at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night about how to kill themselves, it might trigger that, but somebody might not see that email until Monday, that flag, and it might be too late. Now are you held legally responsible because you were told? You know, while it's great and does save lives, there's a little bit of a gray area of the responsibility of that. You know, also, like, you know, for sexting, if an underage kid is sending some sort of unclothed picture to each other, you are now getting a copy of that as well. And you are now like required by law to report this as well. So there's so many legal ramifications to it. It's a feature that's in securely that we are not going to be using. And there's ethical too, and limits to it. Where does the school's reach end, really? If you're at home on Facebook, is it my responsibility? Maybe. It really depends on the school, public versus private as well. Something like bark.us is free for schools, and it'll only inspect things that go through their Google account. Maybe that's the answer as well.
Yeah, and from what I understand, Bark is not that great at filtering either.
Yeah.
But some people were doing some tests and it wasn't catching specific things. The other thing I mentioned with regards to this is if you're G Suite district, you can actually, they have some tools in there with regards to email and some of the other Google products where it can do keyword flagging. And you can then do things like an email. If an email has a certain keyword in it, you can deliver it, not deliver it, forward it to an administrator, deliver it to administrator, but not the person it's targeted for. So you should look into leveraging stuff like that. That can be pretty handy.
If you find yourself in this situation where you're offering advice to parents about how to filter at home, I have 2 product recommendations. The first is Google has a free one called Family Link. It works pretty well for setting screen time limits and filters. And the second is called Circle with Disney, which is a device that sits on your network at home and does not act as a proxy. It acts as basically an inline device looking at all of the traffic and then setting time limits and filtering.
So we have a bunch of questions.
So what are your thoughts on filtering for proxy versus DNS? Well, DNS is easily defeatable.
Yeah.
As far as I know, there's no way to lock in DNS settings on most devices.
So that's something that, yeah, so securely, for example, wants you to set their DNS servers on the macOS, your DNS servers to theirs. And we kind of give the users some like above standard user access so they could connect to Wi-Fi networks at home. And that means they could change their DNS addresses. So that doesn't really work until they figure out a way that could lock that. So that's a thing with DNS. And OpenDNS, for example, would not find anything wrong with content on Wikipedia. It would just find Wikipedia as the problem, per se.
Yeah, you're blocking the domain name at that point. The bottom line is you don't want to do filtering via DNS as your primary.
Yeah, you have a coffee cup? All right, you're cleared.
We don't filter off-site, but on-site we use OpenDNS, and so our students figured out that they could just plug in different DNS. So now I had to go into our firewall and block all DNS on the Wi-Fi that isn't from OpenDNS. So that's how I had to.
Yeah, and we install their umbrella client, which actually an awesome perk of it is it encrypts all DNS traffic as well. So there's this agent, they could change those DNS servers to whatever they want, but it's going through the agent, which is actually then doing the DNS. So, yeah.
Yeah, relying on DNS for filtering is going to be easily circumvented, or it's going to be a hassle. And the way the DNS system is designed to work in general, it's designed to be able to do backups and stuff like that. So does any of you have automated testing to make sure at least some things that you know we want blocked remain blocked even when vendors change things? Not
No.
really. We just kind of
Nope.
deal with it as it comes.
Nothing automated now.
Yeah, for us, for our upper school, filtering is kind of just filling a checkbox.
Yeah.
That actually sounds like a great feature request for whoever your vendor is.
Yeah.
So whether it be securely or whoever you're using.
So how do you explain to educators and administrators that block lists are dynamic and cause websites to work one day? And in our experience, we don't see that kind of change with the block lists. They are dynamic, but in my experience, they're dynamic in that they have stuff added. Seldomly do they have stuff removed.
Yeah.
Would be nice if the vendors would notify us
Like a change log or
when
something.
they were doing something like that. But for the most part, it's not really an issue.
For us, it's actually been harder to, people will be like, well, what's blocked? And I'll be like, well, these content groups are blocked, and I can't tell you what's in them because I don't know, and I'm not sure they know. All right, what are the best strategies to audit what user tried to?
Honestly.
Oh,
So going back to the previous, one thing that I would say about the previous statement is whatever solution you're looking into, ask them where their block lists come from. They don't maintain those. That's maintained by usually a third-party organization.
Best strategies to audit what the user tried to do. Just looking at the logs.
Yeah.
We haven't had, at St. Andrews, there hasn't been that much need. So I know logging in OpenDNS and securely is not one of their strengths. So in looking at those as an option, it wasn't a thing that we cared that much about.
So with our block lists, like I said, we have a link that students can click on to get stuff unblocked. They can make a request. I had one afternoon, I'm sitting at my desk at about 2:45, 3 o'clock, just after the bell at the middle school had gone, and all of a sudden I was being spammed by some students that were thinking it was hilarious to submit hundreds of unblocks. So you follow the audit trail. Go in, find out what IP is making that request. Then I take that IP over to my wireless infrastructure, trace down which AP it's going to. From there, I was able to work out which device the IP was assigned to. I then emailed the principal of the school and said, this kid, and this kid are doing this. The next day, they were pulled into a disciplinary meeting. 2 days later, I got an apology letter from them. So you just take it as it comes.
I'm gonna,
We're generally, at my school, we're intentionally reactive to that. We don't really look at the logs unless there's a reason to. And that's just that's the nature of of how we built our culture.
same at St. Andrews.
So the next question, does anybody use SSL decryption and decrypt and inspect? Like I said, we chose not to for the liability reasons, and it was too much of an effort. On top of that, you need to have a root CA installed on the device for that to work. Otherwise, you're getting some serious error messages. That's controllable on the devices we own, but when a guest walks onto our network and then tries to go to Google, for instance, they get a massive, scary man-in-the-middle attack screen that we decided we just didn't want to deal with.
So for us, we did test SSL encryption just internally in our group. And for the root CA, we are going to push it via config profile next school year, that if we get the okay from the solicitor to at least allow just Google Translate decryption, we already have the infrastructure in place on the client machines.
On top of that, there are, depending on your state, depending on where you are, there are laws with regards to the privacy behind that. And one of the suggestions that was given to us by Smoothwall was we needed some way to notify the staff on a regular basis that we were doing decrypt and inspect, like daily or weekly.
Who has different filtering for the staffers?
We definitely do not have different filtering for our staff and faculty. It's all the same. For that reason, we like to eat our own dog food. So.
All right, so we do filter, we have different levels. We filter differently for our staff and for our students. The filters for our staff are significantly more liberal, but mostly to do with social media. Teachers are aware of that. So we have a default block level that matches the students, and then in order for the teachers to be elevated, they have to actually physically sign in. There's a link on a blocked website that they can click sign in, and they can punch in their credentials. So it's fairly obvious that they're at a different level. When they share resources with the students, they don't necessarily know if it's blocked or unblocked. Generally, it would be unblocked because it's educationally appropriate. And in the few times where it does, they'll generally shoot us an email. I'm trying to share X, Y, and Z site, and they can't open it. And then we look at it.
We do all sorts of different filtering, and that has caused issues. Our faculty staff are not filtered, and we don't want them filtered because we know that there'd be a revolt. Our intermediate school has a little bit more stronger application blocking than the upper school, and our intermediate school has a real strong content filter. So if a teacher kind of works in between the different divisions, then that can kind of cause some problems. And strangely enough, our lower school is actually probably the least filtered, but that's because they're never taking those devices home. They're never really using it beyond in front of the teacher right there. So we're just using the built-in Apple filtering for those ones. So it is all over the place.
Yes, iPad filtering is
Very
a
quickly,
challenge.
we have
Yeah.
45 seconds. iPad filtering is challenging. We don't have any real magic bullets for that other than talk to your vendors.
I can talk to this because we have, like I said, 1,000 devices that go home with students. Smoothwall does in fact have an app that you can use, and most of them do. We do not do that. The problem with that is then the student has to go into that app to be able to get to the internet. Everything else doesn't work. Instead, we send out a proxy via MDM, via Jamf, that becomes a universal proxy across the device. It works okay. We've had some issues with some bugs in iOS where Apple made some changes and the proxy settings would not allow them to authenticate, which was a problem because you don't want to have an open proxy to the internet that anybody can use.
I went to see the doctor.
And I think
I'd
we're
come down
We're out of time.
Yeah.
She
Thank you very
said
much.
I